When you think about the biggest contenders in Formula One, McLaren might just be at the top of your list. They've had one of the fastest cars on the grid for most of this season. But strangely, they haven't been able to claim the Drivers' Championship. And as if that wasn't enough, they're now facing the possibility of losing the Constructors' Championship too right at the final race of the season. Sounds like a plot twist, right? But here's the kicker next season. McLaren might not even be in the fight for the top spots. The FIA has announced some new regulations that could strip McLaren of the edge they've had with their car design. But wait, it gets even more interesting. Their controversial car modifications are being banned for next year. So what does that mean for McLaren's chances? Could they even stay competitive with the new changes? And as for the FIA, they're tightening the rules on certain parts of the car that McLaren has been using to gain an advantage, especially the aerodynamics. So, what's going to happen when next season rolls around? Will McLaren still be a dominant force, or will they fall behind? McLaren has been pushing the limits of car design this year, particularly with their innovative use of aeroelasticity. Sounds complex, right? But stay with me. They've designed a front wing that bends backward when the car is under load. Now, on paper, this might sound like a small tweak, but it has huge implications for the car's performance. You see, by using aeroelasticity, McLaren reduced drag and also improved the car's handling. The wing's design allows it to maintain full downforce in tight turns while actually shifting weight to the back of the car as the speed increases. This gives the drivers a more stable and responsive feel, especially during high-speed corners. It's like having the best of both worlds: stability at slow speeds and a powerful, steady grip at higher speeds. But here's the twist: while McLaren's front wing design was legal according to the current rules, it wasn't long before other teams started questioning its fairness. Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, these teams quickly caught on to what McLaren was doing. Some of them even started replicating the design. But there was one problem: not everyone fully embraced it, mainly because they were worried that the FIA would eventually crack down on it. It wasn't long before McLaren's creative designs landed them in hot water. The turning point came during the race in Baku, where onboard footage showed McLaren's rear wing flaps bending upwards when the DRS was closed. At speeds exceeding 280 km/h, this subtle deformation reduced drag and gave them an advantage. While McLaren argued that everything was within the rules, the FIA didn't see it that way. Soon after, the FIA issued a warning this type of bending would no longer be tolerated. Teams were required to make adjustments immediately. For McLaren, this meant tweaking their rear wing design, but it didn't stop there. The FIA also introduced onboard camera monitoring to scrutinize wing flexibility during races, gathering data to support stricter rules. Red Bull, one of McLaren's fiercest rivals, jumped on the opportunity to criticize their tactics. Claiming McLaren had been bending the rules too far, Red Bull insisted that these tricks had cost them a clear shot at the Constructors' Championship. They even pointed fingers at McLaren for allegedly exploiting a gray area in the regulations, particularly with their so-called mini DRS innovation. The situation escalated when the FIA hinted at tightening load testing for wings in the coming season. This would prevent teams from designing components that flex under stress, a move that could hit McLaren the hardest. As the season progressed, the FIA's crackdown on bending wings became a hot topic in the F1 paddock. Red Bull, being the most vocal critic, argued that McLaren's flexible rear wings had given them a significant performance boost throughout the season, especially during high-speed straights. Pierre Weich, Red Bull's technical director, didn't hold back. He pointed out that without McLaren's questionable wing designs, the Constructors' Championship could have been a very different story. It was clear the design was pushing the boundaries of what was considered legal. But while Red Bull was adamant about cracking down on McLaren's innovation, they weren't the only ones involved in this saga. Other teams, like Ferrari, also raised concerns about McLaren's rear wing design. They agreed that the wings seemed to be more than just a gray area, but were quick to call on the FIA to handle the issue properly. Ferrari's team principal, Fred Vasseur, was particularly vocal about trusting the FIA to sort out the legality of McLaren's modifications, though he admitted it was frustrating to see such controversial designs at play, especially when the competition was so tight. It wasn't just McLaren's wings that were under scrutiny. Other teams had their own versions of flexible components, but none seemed to stir as much controversy as McLaren's rear wing. Despite this, McLaren remained confident, insisting that their design was fully within the rules. They even went so far as to volunteer changes after discussions with the FIA, trying to stay ahead of any potential penalties. Yet the shadow of this controversy loomed large. The bigger question became, what would the future hold for McLaren? With the FIA likely tightening the rules for next season, it looked as if McLaren's car design advantages could be erased almost overnight. As we approached the final races of the season, McLaren's continued push for the constructors' title made Red Bull nervous. McLaren had shown they were more than capable of challenging the reigning champions, especially after a strong showing in Baku, where Oscar Piastri clinched an impressive victory. But there was more to this story than just one race win. McLaren had slowly but surely closed the gap to Red Bull, and now they were fighting for the championship, making every race more tense than the last. The crucial turning point came when McLaren's rear wing, with its bending elements designed to reduce drag, came under heavy scrutiny. The onboard footage from the Baku race made it impossible for anyone to ignore McLaren's innovation seemed to be too much of an advantage. The FIA had already warned teams about flexible wings earlier in the season, but McLaren's persistence with the design stirred the pot even further. The team had defended their position, claiming their rear wing design was legal, but it was clear that this wouldn't be the last time they would need to address the issue. As Red Bull continued to battle for the title, their frustration with McLaren's design grew. They couldn't ignore the fact that McLaren's clever use of aeroelasticity had been a significant factor in their rise up the grid. For Red Bull, whose dominance had been largely unquestioned earlier in the season, watching McLaren close the gap in the constructors' race felt like a blow to their pride. The accusations from Red Bull were clear McLaren's innovative rear wing had given them a performance edge they felt was unfair. Without that advantage, they claimed, McLaren's title charge wouldn't have been as strong, and the constructors' battle might have looked very different. But McLaren wasn't just fighting Red Bull, they were fighting for a future where their cutting-edge designs could still thrive in an ever-evolving sport. And with new regulations looming for the next season, McLaren's engineers knew that their advantage was about to be challenged head-on. The upcoming changes to the wing flexibility rules could knock them back, and they had to prepare for a completely new set of challenges if they hoped to stay on top. While McLaren and Red Bull were grabbing the headlines, Ferrari had quietly been making their own progress throughout the season. After a rocky start, they managed to find a steady rhythm, especially between the Barcelona and Silverstone races. But despite their improvements, Ferrari's overall pace still couldn't match McLaren's in terms of sheer speed, especially on tracks where McLaren's aeroelasticity design gave them an edge. During the mid-season period, Ferrari had averaged a gap of about 0.3 of a second behind the top teams. McLaren, on the other hand, had already managed to push their performance ahead, consistently running just ahead of Ferrari in terms of speed and overall balance. In fact, the battle between McLaren and Ferrari for the second spot in the Constructors' Championship had become so tight that, by the time the season reached the later stages, Ferrari was fighting not just McLaren but also Red Bull's relentless charge for the title. Despite the concerns over McLaren's car design, Ferrari wasn't exactly in a perfect position either. Their floor developments throughout the season had been key to their improvement, with the team introducing new components aimed at improving the car's overall balance. However, while McLaren was relying on their wing flexibility, Ferrari's improvements were mainly in terms of aerodynamics at lower speeds. This development helped the team close the gap on McLaren but never quite allowed them to match the British team's overall speed. In fact, one of Ferrari's most notable moves this season was an experimental floor design that wasn't necessarily aimed at improving lap times but rather at enhancing their understanding of aerodynamics. This move was made during the Las Vegas GP, where the team used the data gathered from their new floor to correlate the behavior of the front tires and the rest of the car. While it didn't make Ferrari significantly faster, the floor did provide the drivers with better confidence, especially in high-speed corners. As we reach the final stretch of the season, the tension between McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull has never been higher. The title fight is so close that it almost feels like the slightest mistake could decide everything. McLaren, who had been battling with Red Bull all season, are now neck and neck with Ferrari for the second spot in the constructors' standings. The pressure is on, and the last few races will be crucial for all three teams. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the season finale, looms large. For McLaren, this could be their chance to clinch their first constructors' title since 1998, a moment they've been dreaming of for years. For Ferrari, it's all about holding on to that hard-earned second place and proving that they are a legitimate contender in the future. As for Red Bull, they're hoping to secure the title once again and cement their position as the dominant force in Formula One. But let's not forget the looming change in regulations. With the FIA's new restrictions on flexible wings and aeroelastic components, it's unclear how each team will adapt. McLaren's unique design, which has helped them close the gap to Red Bull this season, will be under scrutiny. Ferrari's improvements, meanwhile, might put them in a better position to capitalize on any changes in the rules. Red Bull, for their part, has been pushing for stricter enforcement of the regulations, hoping that McLaren's advantage will be erased. One thing is for sure, next year's F1 season is set to be a major shake-up. The changes to the rules could completely alter the pecking order, and it's unclear which teams will come out on top. McLaren's rise this year has shown that they have the potential to challenge the traditional powers, but whether they can maintain that level of performance with the new regulations is still to be seen. As the final race approaches, every point will count. The engineers, strategists, and drivers will be under intense pressure to get everything right. There's no room for error, and each team will be looking for any advantage they can get. Whether it's through clever engineering, strategic calls, or pure speed, the title race is on.